The 3 tips, perhaps it is one of the best stories that deserves to be heard again. So let's start. In a small village surrounded by mountains lived a newlyweds couple. Although their little house was humble and the food was always scarce, both felt lucky to have each other. However, he could not ignore the shortcomings they faced. Every day he saw how his beloved wife tried to get ahead of the house with what little they had, and his heart was filled with concern. One night, while they were having dinner in silence, a potato soup that was barely enough for both of them, he broke the silence. "My wife, there is something I must tell you," he said with a frown and a serious voice. She looked at him surprised, leaving her spoon on the table. "Tell me, my love, what is it?" He took a deep breath and let go. "I have been thinking a lot. I can't stand seeing you go through so many needs. You deserve more, a better life. That is why I decided that I must go." His wife looked at him fixedly, trying to understand. "Go? Where?" he asked, while a shadow of sadness began to cover his face. "I'm going to look for a job far from here, where I can earn enough to give you everything you need. A decent house, new clothes, abundant food. I don't know how long I'll be away, but I promise you I'll be back." She lowered her gaze, her eyes full of tears she struggled to contain. "And what will I do in the meantime?" she whispered. "I don't know if I'll be able to stand being without you for so long." He approached and took his hands tightly. "I know it will be difficult, my love, but I ask you something. Promise me that you will wait for me. Be faithful to me as I will be to you." She, even with tears, looked at him decisively. "I promise you, my husband, I will wait for you all the time it takes. But you also promise me that wherever you are, you will not forget this home, nor the love that awaits you here. That never, wife, I will never forget you." The next day, before the sun rose, he left. He walked for days, crossing mountains and rivers, enduring the heat of the day and the cold of the night. Finally, he arrived at a large farm. It was an impressive place, with extensive fields full of crops and animals. In front of the main house, an older man, with white hair and a piercing look, was standing with a cane in his hand. "Good morning, sir," said the young man, bowing his head respectfully. "I am looking for a job. I am strong and I am willing to do whatever is necessary." The boss, with a serious and paused voice, asked, "Are you a man of your word?" "Yes, sir. I always keep my promises." The boss looked at him as if he were trying to read his soul. After a long silence, he agreed. "Well, here is a job, but before I accept you, tell me, how do you want me to pay you? By day? By week? Or how?" The young man firmly replied, "Sir, I have a proposal. I don't want you to pay me now. Save everything you earn until the day you decide to leave. That day you will give me everything together." The boss raised an eyebrow, surprised by the answer. "Are you sure? Not many would do such a deal." "I'm sure, sir. All this is for my wife, and I want to return with something big for her." The boss smiled slightly and extended his hand. "You have guts, boy. Okay, deal done. Now get to work, because there is always something to do here." The days became weeks, and the weeks became years. From dawn to dusk, the young man worked tirelessly. He plowed the fields, took care of the cattle, repaired fences and roofs, and never complained. His dedication was absolute, and his thoughts were always with his wife. Over time, his black hair began to turn gray, and wrinkles began to mark his face. However, his determination did not fade. Every night, after finishing his day, he looked at the sky and thought, "My wife, I hope you continue to wait for me. All this is for us." The boss, although he was a man of few words, respected the young man. He knew he was an exceptional worker and that his dedication went beyond the ordinary. Finally, after 20 years, the young man, who was no longer so young, presented himself to the boss. "Sir, I have decided that it is time to return to my home. I want to collect everything I have earned." The boss, sitting under a tree, with his staff resting on his knees, looked at him calmly. "Of course, young man, you have worked hard, and it is fair that you receive what is yours. But before giving you your money, I want to make you a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" the intrigued man asked. The boss stood up with difficulty, leaning on his staff. "I will give you 2 options. I can give you all the money you have earned in these years, Or I can give you 3 tips that, believe me, are worth more than any amount of money. If you choose the tips, you will not receive a single coin." The young man frowned, confused. 3 tips? He repeated, as if he could not believe what he heard. "That's right. You do not have to decide now. Take this night to reflect, and tomorrow you give me your answer." That night, lying in his wooden bed, the man could not sleep. He thought about all the hard work he had done, how much he wanted to return with his wife, and show her what he had achieved. But there was also something in the boss voice that he could not ignore. There was a seriousness in his words that made him doubt. At dawn, he presented himself to the boss with the decision taken. "Sir, I have reflected all night. I have decided to accept the 3 tips." The boss smiled slightly, as if he had expected that answer. "Very well. Listen carefully, because these tips can save your life. First, never take shortcuts in life. Short and unknown paths can hide great dangers. Second, never be curious about evil. Curiosity can lead you to perdition. And third, never make decisions in times of anger or pain. You can regret it forever." The man agreed, recording every word in his memory. Then the boss gave him 3 loaves wrapped in a cloth. "These loaves are for the road. 2 are to feed you during your trip, and the 3rd is to share it with your wife when you get home. Now go with God." And so, with the advice and the bread, he embarked on a long way back home, not knowing that these simple tips would change his fate. The return trip was long and exhausting, but he did not complain. Each step brought him closer to his home, to his wife, to the life he had left behind 20 years ago. The sun burned his skin during the day, and the cold of the night choked his bones, but he kept going with determination. In his mind, the 3 tips of the boss resonated like a constant echo, although he still did not fully understand its value. One afternoon, while walking down a dusty path, a man appeared among the trees. He was a stranger, kind-looking, but with a smile that seemed too broad. "Hello, friend," the man greeted him. "Where are you going?" "I'm going home, to a distant village." "I still have a long way to go," he replied. The stranger pointed to a narrow path among the bushes. "Ah, well, you're lucky. There's a shortcut out there that will save you half the time. Many people take it." The traveler's heart jumped with emotion as he imagined getting home faster. He was about to follow the stranger's advice when suddenly he remembered the boss words. Never take shortcuts in life. Short and unknown paths can hide great dangers. He took a deep breath and nodded. "Thank you, but I prefer to follow the main path." The stranger looked at him with a raised eyebrow, but did not insist and walked away. 2 days later, while resting in an inn, he heard a group of travelers talking about that shortcut. Apparently, it was an ambush used by thieves to evict the unruly from all their belongings. He felt a chill when he realized how close he was to danger. The first tip had already saved his life. Later, in the middle of a cold and dark night, he arrived at another inn to rest. It was a small and old place, with wooden walls that creaked at the slightest movement. The innkeeper, a man of few words, received him kindly. "Come in, traveler. There's hot food and a bed ready to rest." That night, while he was sleeping deeply, a heartbreaking scream woke him up. The sound was so creepy that it gave him goosebumps. It seemed to come from somewhere nearby, as if someone was suffering terribly. Instinctively, he got up and went to the door, willing to investigate. But just when his hand touched the doorstep, he remembered the second tip: never be curious about evil. Curiosity can lead you to perdition. He stopped and returned to his bed, although the screams continued. He covered his ears with his hands and waited, praying that everything would end soon. The next morning, while he was having breakfast, the innkeeper asked him, "Did you sleep well, sir?" "Not much, really. I heard some horrible screams during the night." The innkeeper looked at him seriously and said, "You were lucky not to leave your room. Those screams are caused by a crazy woman who roams around here. Anyone who goes out to investigate does not live to tell it." The traveler felt a chill run through his body. For the second time, the innkeeper's advice had saved his life. After several more days on the road, the traveler finally recognized the landscape surrounding his home. The mountains, the trees, everything was as he remembered it. His heart was beating fast when he thought of his wife, of his little house, of the moment when he would finally hug her again. As he approached, he saw smoke coming out of the chimney, and there in the garden was she. But she was not alone. A young man was resting next to her, and she caressed his hair tenderly while they both laughed. The traveler's heart was filled with pain and rage. How could he have betrayed her after so many years of waiting? After everything he had sacrificed for her, he hastened the passage with his clenched fists and his eyes full of tears. His whole body asked for revenge. But then, in the midst of his fury, the innkeeper's words resounded in his mind. Never make decisions in moments of anger or pain. You could regret it forever. He held his breath. His breathing was heavy, and he felt that his chest was going to explode. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and decided to wait until the next morning when his mind was clearer. He spent the night under a nearby tree, struggling against the whirlwind of emotions that invaded him. At dawn, with a calm heart, but full of uncertainty, he approached the house and knocked on the door. His wife opened the door, and when she saw him, her eyes filled with tears. "My husband," he exclaimed, hugging him tightly. "You have returned. I knew you would return." He, still with pain in his chest, gently pulled her away. "How can you receive me like this after what I saw yesterday?" he said with a broken voice. "I saw you with another man in the garden. You betrayed me." She looked at him, confused and wounded. "Betray you? I would never do it. I have always waited for you. That man you saw is our son." The traveler was paralyzed. His mind took a long time to process what he had just heard. "Our son?" he asked, almost without a voice. She felt tears running down her face. "When you left, I found out she was pregnant. I never had a chance to tell you. She grew up without knowing you, but every day she talked about you, how brave and hardworking you were. Now she is 20 years old, and she looks so much like you." At that moment, the young man appeared at the door. He was tall, strong, and had the same deep eyes as the traveler. When he saw him, the son smiled shyly. "Is he my father?" he asked, addressing his mother. She nodded, and the young man approached with open arms. The traveler, still in shock, hugged him tightly. For the first time in years, the tears that fell from his eyes were not of sadness, but of happiness. That night, while they were having dinner together, the traveler took out the last piece of bread that the patron had given him. "This bread is special. The patron gave it to me to share it with you, my wife." She carefully took the bread and split it in two. When she did it, something fell to the ground. There were 3 gold ingots, 10 diamonds, and 2 rubies that shone under the light of the lamp. Everyone was speechless. "Where did this come from?" his incredible wife asked. "It is the fruit of 20 years of work," said the traveler, smiling. "But the patron's advice was worth much more than all this gold. They saved my life and brought me back home. Since then, the family has lived happily, always remembering that wisdom, love, and patience are more valuable than any wealth."